We learn from the book of Genesis, after that Adam sinned through the deception of Satan and Eve's taking of the forbidden fruit, that God stepped in to deliver them from the sad and awful effects of the fall by providing a sacrifice and coats of skin to cover their nakedness. It was then the Lord promised the seed of the woman, that is, the future male child of Eve, who would bruise the serpent's head. That is, Satan's head, like a serpent's head, would be crushed and we'd be saved. And by doing so, his heel would be bruised. Genesis 3:15. This being a reference to the coming into the world of the Lord Jesus Christ to save his people from their sins, from guilt and the devastating effects of sin. This people being defined as peoples from every kindred, tongue and nation. As the history of redemption was unfolded, we learn of the Lord bringing out of Egypt the children of Israel with a strong hand, so to speak, and to the point of God giving the law to Moses and the children of Israel agreeing to follow the Lord and keep the terms of the legal covenant. However, this was their downfall. They failed to keep their part of that covenant and turned aside from obeying the Lord on many occasions. One such example, and there are many examples, the Lord commanded Israel to go in to possess the promised land, to destroy all the Philistines, as they had fulfilled the measure of their sin. They were the enemies of God. Israel failed to do this as they were instructed and had to live with the consequences. It was later, in the time of King Saul and Jonathan his son, that the Philistines had gathered themselves together to fight with Israel. As written in 1 Samuel chapter 13, the number of Philistines were like the sand of the seashore, and the Hebrews were distressed and hid themselves in caves and thickets and in high places and pits. It was then that King Saul thought he knew best and went against the direct command of God and offered personally a sacrifice according to his own terms. He did not wait for Samuel the prophet to make the appointed sacrifice at the appointed time. The result was Samuel stated to Saul, "You have done foolishly, saying, thou hast not kept the commandment of the Lord. So now thy kingdom shall not continue." And the Lord sought another man to reign as king. This was in fact pointing to King David the shepherd boy, who slew Goliath, who was a Philistine. The Christian will learn from this that we must obey the word of the Lord and not do our own thing and think that we know best. Otherwise, what happened to Saul will happen to us. The Israelites had failed to do as they had been told, and in the end ended up with no blacksmith or no smith being found throughout the land of Israel, for Israel to make swords and spears. But the Israelites went down to the Philistines to sharpen every man his spear and his coulter and his axe and his mattock. They were dependent upon the Philistines for their weapons. Yet they had a file for the mattocks and for the coulters and for the forks and for the axes to sharpen their goads. In other words, they were left high and dry without the means to defend themselves, to sharpen their weapons, and the Philistines had all the means and methods to survive and conquer Israel. Now, in connection with this, the Christian today, how does this affect us and what lessons can we learn from this? As Christians, we are called to preach the gospel of Christ to all men, as this is the means of delivering and saving men from sin, death, and hell. In this process, churches are established to teach the truths of the Lord Jesus Christ under the exhortation to earnestly contend for the faith once delivered unto the saints. Sadly, however, weak men like Israel and Saul of old think they know best and ignore the commands of God, and go against the commandments of God. The result is they become weak and fail to fulfill their responsibilities to their shame. Islam is the enemy of the Christian, the enemy of the free man, and the enemy of God, despite what they say. Just like the Philistines were vast in number and enemies of Israel, and were in number like the sand on the seashore, they had taken over the ability for the Hebrews to sharpen their weapons. They have infiltrated our legal systems, educational systems, political and legal avenues, and social communication networks by seeking to deny free speech and generating hate speech laws to prevent anyone telling the truth and pointing out the way forward, and teaching the way of salvation by Christ alone. Any Christian will be able to tell you the errors of Islam and point out the way of Christ. The Christian is your friend. A Christian should be able to instruct you and educate you in terms of the following: the truth about the scriptures, the truth about man's fall and need of salvation, the truth about the person of the Lord Jesus Christ, the way of salvation by him, the responsibilities of the saved, the errors of Islam and other false religions, the truth relating to the teaching of Christ, the morality of marriage, the wrongness of same-sex relationships, and inappropriate sex education to our infant school children, the reality of the rise of Islam, which opposes Christ, and it being the major giant in false religions that works politically to rob us of our freedom to speak and teach the gospel of Christ. It is for this reason I published my book, The West and the Quran, which was written to help readers to be informed of these things. I would be pleased to help you further and speak to your church or group to give further information about these things.